For more on what we think about Judy Shelton's nomination and what it could mean for the president and the economy right now, we're joined by Romina Boccia. Also, she's the director of the Heritage Foundation Center for the Federal Budget, and Karl Smith, who is vice president of federal tax and economic policy at the Tax Foundation. All right, Romina, what do you think about this change in opinion on what she sees in terms of monetary policy at this point?
I think we'll have to wait what Shelton has to say about it in the Senate hearing today. I'm quite confident she'll be asked about it, but the views she holds aren't that different. We're living in a very different environment with the Fed operating under a new normal. The emergency measures that we thought they would long have quit, they're continuing to do so, and paying interest on excess reserves. That's really reduced liquidity in the markets, and that's also one of the main factors why we haven't seen the inflation that many economists predicted when the Fed was first starting to engage in quantitative easing. So we are living in a new normal, and the Fed has a lot more policy tools than just rate cuts. So it's something to consider there.
Karl, what do you think of Shelton's nomination? What would happen if she were actually passed by the Senate? What will happen to the Fed?
So I'm not a fan of Shelton at all. I don't think her underlying views have changed in any way. She's been pretty consistent about what she believes for 20, 30 years. She's hard money. She believes in fixed exchange rates. She's a Mundell disciple. I think everything that she says now is an attempt to appease Trump, and I think those are two bad things in one. So I don't think hard money policy is the right policy for today. I think maybe in the 70s that made sense. It doesn't make sense in the economy today. And the fact that she's just willing to throw Fed independence overboard is a double negative.
Steve, let me ask you, how would the Fed's views be altered if she is passed today?
So everybody I talk to says that the Fed can withstand an outlier or two. I think one senator was quoted as saying that 5 Judy Sheltons would be a problem, 1 is not. Chairman Powell was asked yesterday in a kind of shadow dance question about this hearing today, about whether or not diversity of views is a good idea on the Fed, and he said it was. It was a bit like he put his stamp on the nomination today. I'm not really sure. If you go back and you look at what he said, it sort of sounded like, I'm okay with Judy Shelton. I don't think he wants to fight the political...
How can you possibly say you're opposed to diverse opinions and views?
Right, right. That's true. That's true. It might have just been a pro forma answer.
Like a bunch of yes men on my board.
But it felt like one of those setups. It felt, you know, because sometimes there's a question planted with the senator. Look, we have to sort of lay the cards on the table. The issue is not so much her being a Fed governor. Question is what happens in 2022.
Well, that was the question I was asking you during the commercial break.
Well, you were during the commercial break.
And I want to know whether you think
does she become the chair, and then really getting back to Becky's question, and it comes to a question of motivations. Do you have a Fed chair or a Fed governor who is doing what they're doing because of who's in the White House and the fiscal policy, and not based on some theory of monetary policy? And that's the question.
Romina, let me ask you, what do you think the big challenges are going to be for the Federal Reserve over the next, let's say, 2 years?
I think the Federal Reserve and really central banks across the globe are treading in deep water. They don't really know what to do. It seems like what we thought we knew about money and how central banks are supposed to operate is no longer true necessarily. And so I think Judy Shelton will add important diverse viewpoint, and that one will be moving away from discretionary policy towards more of a rules-based framework. I think that's a really important view in this environment where we're having so much money getting pumped into the system from Japan, from the European Central Bank, and of course also from the Federal Reserve. It's the pro-growth fundamental policies that the president has been pursuing that have been driving up wage growth. Maybe we don't have so much a liquidity challenge in the system as we need to continue to chip away at regulatory policies that are holding back productivity and wage growth.
Do you think that President Trump would prefer her as the Fed chair over Jay Powell? And if not Jay Powell, what do you think about Kevin Warsh, who's the other name that always pops up in these conversations?
You know, I think it's important not to have groupthink on the Fed board, and that's, I think, where Shelton comes in and adds that different perspective that's more based in hard money, as was already mentioned, but also a rules-based framework. But the Fed has been actually doing good work given the environment that they found themselves in, and we should be considering other policy tools to reduce the Fed's role in the markets when it comes to the repo markets, for example, and also the regulatory powers that the Fed has assumed, since Dodd-Frank passed. Those are some areas that we need to look at and not be so focused on rate cuts.
Karl, yeah, I mean, in Shelton's defense, I think one of the things Romina's saying is that, look, you have other central banks doing other things, like, for example, keeping rates negative. And the president's idea, and one that appears Shelton has backed up, is, hey, we have an idea of what ideal policy is, but in the real world, these other banks are doing this, so the Fed should respond. What's wrong with that?
Well, so I think that's mildly consistent with Shelton over time. I mean, she's for fixed exchange rates, she's for coordinated policy, but she's always been for coordinating it away from what other central banks are doing. She's been incredibly critical of all the extra policies that have been put in, of all the extraordinary policies that have been put in. And my biggest fear is if she became chairman, if Trump were to make that unfortunate nomination, that she would reverse and go back to her hard money policies as soon as Trump was out of office. And that I think that's the biggest fear. We're in an environment where our star is low. We're in an environment where we're fighting against declining inflation, the potential of deflation in the next recession. And with the chairman with those views, I think is quite dangerous for the U.S. economy.